Hello, everyone. Kevin Scally from Charity Navigator. I know some folks joining us as we get started with today's live stream, but let me start by saying that I hope everyone is having a peaceful and enjoyable Veterans Day. And a big thank you to everyone that's tuning in live or watching this recording after the fact. It goes without saying, but Veterans Day is a very important holiday to all Americans. We honor and celebrate Americans' veterans for their patriotism, their love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for common good. Today, I am honored to have Dan Goldenberg join us for our live stream. Dan is a retired US Navy captain with 27 years of active and reserve military service, and is now serving as the executive director for Call of Duty Endowment, which we will dive deep into today, and vice president for Activision Blizzard, which I know those that are video game fans know those names very well. But Dan, thank you first and foremost for your service and joining me today.
Well, thanks so much, Kevin. It's an honor to have served. Every day I'm grateful for the opportunity and now in this role to be able to give back to our veterans, especially contemplating on a day like today is particularly meaningful.
Of course. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to connect with me and those that will be viewing today. So I certainly have a number of areas that I'd like to explore with you, but for those of you that are watching live, please feel free to share your questions for Dan about Veterans Day and the work that the Call of Duty Endowment is doing. But Dan, what I'd like to start with is a pretty big question. What does Veterans Day mean to you personally?
Yeah, so Veterans Day is very personal to me because of, my time in service and all the men and women that I've had the opportunity over the years to lead and watch them, flourish in the service and then sometimes struggle, but oftentimes succeed after the service, reintegrating into the civilian world, finding their place. So I think it's a great time to reflect and contemplate on service and how our society values it. And to me, while thank yous are wonderful, the best thing we can do for the vast majority of veterans on a day like today is help them find meaningful employment, especially given the circumstances of the economy in this pandemic. So for me, obviously, the economic well-being of veterans is front and center on a day like today. And, if we can be successful here, so many other challenges you hear about that veterans face are ameliorated or go away completely, be it, having a good job that has benefits, well, that reduces the need for quality medical care. Well, I shouldn't say it reduces it, it provides it, right? Quality be it mental or physical health care, being around others, having a purpose that reduces depression. All these kind of challenges are really made better when someone has meaningful work. So for me, that's the mission I'm focused on, and I renew my commitment to it every year at this time.
Appreciate you sharing that, and I also appreciate you kind of addressing the systemic issues, that it's not just a matter of kind of those kind of connected elements that that people see maybe kind of on a very visual level, but it's really a matter of trying to get to the root of the issue. So I'm definitely looking forward to exploring your approach there. So for many of those that are tuning in, we are streaming across the Charity Navigator platform as well as Call of Duty Endowment. They may be very aware of the popular video game franchise Call of Duty. However, there may be some that are unaware of the Endowment. So Dan, it would be great if you could share how and why the Endowment was formed and its importance to the communities that you serve.
Yeah, I love talking about this. And thanks for the opportunity to mention it. So 11 years ago today, the Call of Duty Endowment was founded by Bobby Kotick, who's the CEO of Activision Blizzard, which is the world's largest interactive entertainment company. Call of Duty, Candy Crush, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, these are some of the titles that the company produces. But it was very important to Bobby to find a way that was meaningful to the community of gamers that support the company to give back. And in thinking this through, the company's flagship game for a long time has been and still is Call of Duty. And it seemed like the most meaningful way to give back was to those who inspired that game, those who served in uniform. And so that's where Bobby started. And he was pretty shocked back in 2007 to learn how bad the veteran employment situation was. And he thought perhaps, given that at the time, the government, the nonprofit, the VA efforts to help veterans find jobs really just weren't working very well. Even the private sector elements. And he thought, we've got a pretty successful corporate strategy here, something we call narrow and deep, which is we focus on doing one or just a couple things really, really well and focusing our resources on that. And perhaps if we applied that approach to, in the social impact setting, we can make a real difference. So that was the thinking. A lot of lessons were learned over the last couple of years, but ultimately the strategy worked. And so in 2000, and I can talk a lot more about that, what was the strategy and how it worked, but in 2000, back in 2009, the endowment launched, and it's just been full throttle ever since, focused narrow and deeply on veteran employment. We don't focus on military spouse employment or any of the other very worthy veteran causes, just employment. And I think that's enabled us to go really deep on it, to understand the root causes of it, and then find the organizations that are especially effective at addressing those root causes. And we've done that. And those were some of the lessons we learned early on, was that, the biggest branded nonprofits are not necessarily the most effective. In fact, we found through our work and research, we partnered with Deloitte to create the screening protocol that we've used since 2013 called the Seal of Distinction, to really find the highest performing nonprofits. And almost none of them had nationally recognized names. They were just heads down doing running the programs. And we really took an analytical lens to it, removed the emotion, removed the brand elements. We were able to find some pretty impressive organizations. Believe it or not, in the US, there's more than 68,000 nonprofits with the word veteran in their name. So that's just as a starting point. That doesn't include the ones that don't have veteran in the name, or help veterans as a secondary or tertiary mission. There's a lot. And so the problem was a needle in the haystack issue. And honestly, Charity Navigator's resources have been incredibly helpful in us, finding those needles in the haystack, identifying them, vetting them in partnership with Deloitte, and then helping them grow. And that's been our strategy ever since. And we didn't set out for this to be the situation, but we've become the largest private funder of veteran employment in the US, and working towards our way there in the UK.
Well, a lot of appreciation for the work that you're doing for veterans and finding those needles in the haystack. I guess to reflect on that is that you say, believe it or not, I definitely believe it, of the 68,000 with the name veterans. And that is kind of part of the reason why people come to Charity Navigator, is finding the organizations that they can feel good about donating to, that are trustworthy, and certainly wanting to make sure that the organizations that they're supporting are impactful, they're financially efficient, and they're effective at what they do. Now, speaking of how the endowment was formed, the idea of a gamer has massively expanded over the past 20 to 30 years, where people of all ages and backgrounds come together for their appreciation for the art form of video games. And many games have a massive fandom and culture around them. How has that fandom impacted the endowment's success and growth?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Video games have changed a lot from the time I rode on my bike to the mall at the age of 13 to buy my Atari 2600, right? The stereotypical notion of people of a certain age, my age and older, is that the gamer is someone who's in the basement of their parents' house by themselves playing on a console. But that's really not what gaming is today. It's much more social, very, very interactive. And I think we've seen in the pandemic, it's been an incredibly helpful form of release, and stress management for a lot of folks, and connectivity, right? A great way to connect with others. The communities who game are just really, especially the younger ones, very cause motivated. They care a lot. They want to do something, and they want to be activated. And so an enormous amount of funding for our efforts has actually come directly from the gamer community. Activision Blizzard has been an incredible partner to the Call of Duty Endowment. They fund all of our overhead, all of our operating costs, and they donate generously to the grant fund, but so does the gaming community as well. So they've been incredibly engaged. We periodically do pulse checks to see if this issue of veteran employment is top of mind, and it remains so. And what's been really interesting to us is the question is how much would this issue resonate internationally? And the answer is it resonated very well internationally with their gamers, much more than anyone expected. So they're a critical part of making this happen. And to be quite honest, a lot of vets are gamers too. So it's another fantastic way to connect with the community.
Absolutely. No, I think whether it's playing a game, whether it's holding a fundraiser, whether it's making an outright donation, especially in kind of today's economic climate, is that people do want to make an impact and have their efforts, whether it's live streaming on Twitch or a variety of different items, be able to make other people's lives easier and better. So it's nice to be able to see that connection to everything from the game all the way up to the endowment. Now, for those of you that are just tuning in, today we're connecting with Dan Goldenberg, who's a U.S. Navy captain in honor of Veterans Day, and also the executive director of Call of Duty Endowment. So certainly have a lot of questions for Dan that we'll be exploring here. But if you have any questions of your own, please feel free to sound off in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to those. Now, Dan, throughout the pandemic, Charity Navigator has been in touch with organizations to measure the programmatic and financial impact COVID-19 is having on nonprofits. How has the pandemic and recession impacted communities that the endowment serves?
Yeah, it's a great question. We look, I think the most compelling number to me is we look at our Q2 data. So through June, we saw a 31% increase in veterans asking for help finding jobs compared to the same period last year. So, economically speaking, it's hit them hard. Historically, we know that veterans tend to be significantly more underemployed than non-veterans. In fact, 1 in 3 veterans are underemployed, which is pretty staggering. Underemployment, it's not well measured by the government, and it's perhaps not as top of mind to a lot of media sources, but it's a big deal. And it's before the pandemic ever hit, it was bad and it was getting worse. So the pressures of the pandemic tend to hit those who are underemployed first, the hardest. While economically speaking, this is a rough time for many Americans, it tends to hit veterans worse. So our partners are 12 grantees, 2 in the UK and 10 in the US. They felt it. They felt an enormous surge in demand for their services, and some of them. So we serve all veterans, and the organizations we support serve different groups of veterans in different ways. Some of those who, for instance, serve very high barrier to employment veterans have a greater need for face-to-face, really high-touch counseling. And you can imagine in this environment that all of a sudden became very difficult. So if you are, for instance, you have an office next to a VA hospital where you were expecting, regular daily referrals, folks just walking in the office asking for help, that's completely dried up. And your staff has to learn to operate in a completely different way. So we've seen our grantees really have to pivot, invest, and we've helped them, of course, in new technologies, new trainings, new ways of operating, really. Then we have some of our other grantees who've always been operating in a virtual setting. So I think of organizations like Vet Jobs, which formerly Casey, or Hire Heroes USA. They've always leaned very heavily into technology, but their clients tend to be those who are transitioning service members or new veterans who probably tend to have lower barriers to employment. So it's particularly hit those, I think of like Salvation Army Community Integration Services or Veterans Inc. out in Massachusetts. Salvation Army CIS is out in LA. They deal with almost 100% homeless populations, many who have, let's say, don't have a driver's license and have other barriers to employment. They may have some mental health challenges. Their job got a lot harder. So they've had to be some of the most innovative organizations dealing with. JBS SoCal is another one. So that, it's hit veterans and those who serve them in a variety of ways. What I'm really proud to say is all of our grantees have sort of turned on a dime. Took some of them maybe 2 or 3 months, but literally because of their work to this point in the year, we've never funded the placement of more veterans ever than we have this year to this point. So the demand's great, but our grantees have really stepped up and are meeting it. And honestly, and we can talk more about this if you want, it stems back to our vetting. We picked winners because we applied a very diligent approach to assessing them.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's delve a little bit deeper. You've been able to scale up and be able to meet the needs of or the emerging needs that you're seeing. some of the steps that you've taken from a grant making perspective? I guess from, yes, a vetting perspective, as well as actually just making those funds available
Yeah.
to be able to meet those needs in such a quick turnaround.
Yeah, I suppose partially inspired by, the venture capital world, partially inspired by sort of Elon Musk's first principles approach. We didn't take, when we launched our current program that we call the Seal of Distinction, we didn't take anything for granted. We started really with first principles, which is, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to place as many veterans in high quality jobs as possible. And in as short a time as possible. How do you do that? Well, you look at, what are the organizations that can handle the throughput, that either have a large volume or have the ability to scale to a large volume? What are the organizations that can do that at a reasonable cost? Because the lower the cost, the more veterans we can help, obviously. And then doing so, kind of spinning the third plate, if you will, is can they drive quality outcomes based on that? And we care about all three. And so we put in place a system. First, we defined what is a high quality job. Initially, we had some sort of very airy-fairy kind of notions of what that was. We're like, oh, 21st century jobs. These are people working in high tech and lab coats. And when we really started to understand what high quality employment meant, we realized, it means a well-paying job, something that's, significantly a living wage that comes with benefits. It's not going to be offshored, where you have a future to develop a career. That's a high quality job. And then we said, okay, how can we measure that? And so average starting salary, 6-month and 12-month retention rates, are the folks, once they get the job, staying there, they're voting with their feet, and are these, fighting that underemployment pressure, are these part-time or full-time jobs? So we measure all that. We measure a bunch of demographic information as well, and those become sort of the hurdles, achievement there, for those we were ultimately fund. High quality employment, high starting salaries, high retention rates, very high percent of full-time employment for a reasonable cost. And ultimately, this fed into our Seal of Distinction program. It's a one and a quarter page application. It's really short, very focused on metrics. And the organizations that can provide the data we're looking for, and it's a surprisingly small number that can, and that's okay. We're fine with that. Then get voted upon by our outside board of advisors. The top organizations out of that process then go over to Deloitte. Deloitte spends several days on site with them, or at least pre-COVID they did, doing an assessment, essentially validating their metrics, looking at their historical, current, and future financial strength, doing background checks on their key employees, and doing a policies and procedures check, making sure they're complying with the law and taking good care of their employees. And the organizations that pass that test are awarded the Seal of Distinction. They get a modest, unrestricted award, and then the opportunity to apply for a restricted grant with us. So our prize is $30,000, but then our restricted grants that stem from that, and only organizations that pass this vetting get the restricted grants, average around $500,000 a year. So it's significant. But that's the process we go through. And what it's done is we implemented in 2013. And just to give you a sense, in the organization's first 4 years, we funded the placement of 1,000 veterans. In the next 4 years that followed the implementation of that, we funded 50,000 vets placed. So it was a hockey stick moment for us when we were able to pick the winners, find the needles in the haystack. It's made all the difference in the world. And we evaluate their progress on a quarterly basis, but we do it in a very low touch thing. And I know there's a big debate here. We can get into this more if you want in the funder community about, reducing burdens on their grantees. But I would argue that it's our responsibility as funders to set the right burden and not an iota more. Don't ask an iota more of information from your grantees than you need to make, to help them, to coach them, and make decisions about future funding. And that's all we've ever done. We've always took great care in not overburdening our grantees, but getting the minimum information we need to make decisions. And so when there were calls from a lot of funders to step back, hey, stop bugging your grantees asking for information, we didn't change a bit. We didn't change one bit because we knew we'd already considered that from the outset. And our grantees, we make it super easy for them to report that. And I think honestly, if you could have off the record, Dan not in the room conversations with them, I think they'd really tell you that we're not very onerous, but we're very focused in what we do. And that's made all the difference. Our grantees, like I said, they are performing at their highest level ever in the midst of this pandemic. And we, because of that, we're able even to direct more funding towards them.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is an interesting kind of approach of, you already got ahead of some of the concerns that could have come up throughout the pandemic. So I think that, it's an incredible case study, especially with when you're sharing the numbers of how you've been able to grow the endowment so quickly, and a matter of finding the right partners. So I'm sure as we have grant makers and nonprofits that are tuning in or watching this later, is that, that's resonating a lot with them. I'm sure of it. Dan, one of the things that, as you're talking about those numbers, and there may be veterans that are either tuning in now or watching this later, that may be looking for help. If you could kind of walk through a 1,000-foot overview of how they might approach a partner and be able to secure placement, that's facilitated through the endowment, what does that look like? What recommendations would you give them?
Well, first I'll say the easiest thing is, honestly, it can be bewildering to veterans when they're searching for help. We have a very generous country, and there's lots of folks out there who are offering a hand, and so it's what we call the paradox of choice, right? When you're given too many options, you choose not to choose. It becomes overwhelming. So we think we've helped simplify that a bit. If any veteran who needs help, or if you know a veteran who needs help, they can go to our website, callofdutyendowment.org, and click on the Veteran Support tab. There's a page for the UK veterans and a page for US veterans. We just collect a very minimum amount of information, and based on that, we refer you to the most appropriate one of our partners who can help you, and you're off to the races. It's really simple. And you can have great confidence that the organizations you'll be working with are truly best in class in the US and the UK. We've, as you can imagine, we've assessed hundreds of organizations over the years, and the 12 we work with, we consistently see as driving the best outcomes, not just for for a funder, more importantly for individual veterans. If you take, for instance, Salvation Army Community Integration Services, 100% of their veterans are homeless. 100%. They have an 80% placement rate, and 80% of those veterans are still in those jobs 6 months later. That's pretty remarkable.
Incredible.
And then you take, for instance, Vet Jobs, who has a special expertise with the Guard and Reserve, and their average salary numbers are north of $70,000, which is again pretty astounding. And they're placing thousands of vets a year. So the bottom line is we can route any vet who needs help to the best organization that can help them based on their geography, based on their service circumstances, et cetera.
Thanks for sharing that resource. We did have a question that came in.
Oh, great.
One of the questions was a matter of how Call of Duty or any of the Activision Blizzard franchises maybe have mobilized during the pandemic, and if there's been any sort of special fundraising events within the community that you might be able to speak to.
Yeah, actually, it's been remarkable. In May, we partnered with Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg, wonderful, human being in his own right. And we created a pack, an in-game pack that raised more than $3 million for the cause. The Call of Duty community rallied around it, and it was called the Fearless Pack. You can Google it, Call of Duty Endowment Fearless Pack, inspired by Flo's service. Flo himself has been a great advocate for veteran employment, and also happens to be a gamer. So it was a perfect kind of marriage made in heaven, and the Call of Duty community just loved it. They were incredible. And I can't say much more except there's more to come. We also partnered with the Tony Hawk Pro Skater franchise. So it's not just the Call of Duty community, but have raised some more significant funds through them by some in-game, Tony Hawk Pro Skater remaster, incredible support from that gaming community as well. And also in the Call of Duty mobile community, we did a pack. All of this occurred during the pandemic. So the company's massively behind it. Every cent we raise, literally every cent we raise these times goes directly to these employment grants. It doesn't cover the endowment's overhead. The company doesn't keep a cent. And you can imagine it's an all hands on deck evolution to get these packs made, right? It involves artists, marketing, PR, all kinds of, commerce, our first party, Sony, Microsoft, et cetera. And they've all been wonderful coming together to make this happen. And hopefully more to come.
That's awesome. Well, you've got me intrigued, and you said a lot of names of franchises that I'm a big fan of personally. So I'll be on the lookout for that. We are quickly approaching time, but I do want to put another call out for questions. So if anybody has any last minute questions for Dan about the endowment or about ways to get involved in Veterans Day, please feel free to include them in the chat, and I'll do my best to ask them, or we can follow up with Dan after the fact. Dan, I imagine that you're having, you and the organization are having, some intimate conversations with veterans and their needs. What are some of the needs that your constituents are expressing to you directly or to your partners, especially given during the economic climate? And I guess as a kind of a follow-on from this, we talked about impact and how important that is. What is the ideal outcome and impact of the endowment look like, if you could kind of sum that up?
Yeah, so I'll start with the last question, which is like the impact. We are shooting to have funded the placement of 100,000 veterans into jobs by 2024, and we're not taking our foot off the gas. We're absolutely primed and ready to do that. We've chosen the right partners. One of the things I didn't mention, but we get those quarterly results, and they don't sit on my computer. We assess them, and if organizations are struggling to hit their goals. So we have very simple agreements with all of our grantees. There's no 30 page grant request or anything like that. It's a page and a half agreement. Once they pass their seal of distinction vetting, then it's simply a couple of conversations and a page and a half agreement, essentially, and we're off to the races. But one of the things in those agreements is a commitment to make a certain number of placements per the amount of resources we donate, and to hit a certain quality level. And so we're monitoring how they're doing each quarter. And if they're off glide slope, we have a conversation. We find out what the challenge is and what we can do to help them overcome it. And generally speaking, 90% of the time they're able to do that. If they're not, we stop working with those organizations and we work with other organizations. That's rare, but it does happen occasionally. But this enables us to stay very close, to answer the first part of your question, and understand what's going on. We understand we have to maintain a level of humility, because the bottom line is they're the ones out there every day doing this work. But we also have a certain advantage because we have the 30,000-foot view over what all of our grantees are doing, right? So we can see trends. For instance, collectively, year to date, they've made over 11,000 placements through our funding. And so we start to see some trends. How are we doing with women veterans? How are we doing with Black veterans, et cetera? So we watch these things and we coach and we try to connect them with resources. I think, the areas where they're struggling are pretty much what you'd expect. Early on, it was with respect to technology, making sure they had the technology necessary to operate virtually, especially those high touch organizations, and changing their processes and procedures and getting veterans comfortable. Those same organizations had to really ramp up their outreach efforts. And then along the way, the veterans themselves, they're seeing a lot of challenges. This is not going to be surprising, but childcare, for instance, or transportation or other issues that have just been made. And sometimes they realize, yes, I understand you want a job, but we have to get a roof over your head right now. We have to take care of some more basic kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And our grantees, what we love about them is there's a ton of passion in the nonprofit space. There always is. But the best organizations, they refer, they don't replicate, they don't try to problem solve everything for the veterans. So they've got a roster of organizations when someone's struggling with housing, for instance, or debt or legal issues. They don't try and problem solve, they refer immediately, and they triage, they fix the biggest problems first, and then they say, okay, now when they're ready, let's get them back to employment. So I think
see
all
the
those,
same.
yeah,
With effective organizations, you have to have a partner network. You can't necessarily be trying to solve all of the issues, just because
absolutely
the issues are so vast, and you want to make sure that you're leveraging the expertise that has the infrastructure to be able to support.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what they do. They're really good. They refer, they don't replicate.
Well, speaking of infrastructure, we got one last question that came in from the audience, and it was interest that was peaked in and around working in the UK. So just wondering how the endowment either expanded into the UK or if that was kind of a primary objective kind of from the very get-go, and if there is any sort of growth plans to other countries around the world as well.
Yeah, so it was a very slow and deliberate process. We wanted to be very careful. We didn't want to assume. We knew by 2015 we had a model that was working really well, and we also knew that there were pretty profound needs in the UK. But we took our time to really understand the market. We didn't want to be the ugly Americans presuming worked in the US would work in the UK. So we did a lot of research and conversations, and ultimately 3 years ago we started a process of launching there. We've been there for 2 years, and it's been great. It's a different nonprofit environment there. I think there's a cultural expectation in much of Western Europe that the government's going to take care of stuff. They're going to take care of social problems. But I think over time, folks have learned that that's in the UK, that's actually not the case quite often. As an example, both of the princes had to get involved early on. Well, I shouldn't say early on. It's been probably 5 or 6 years ago, to sort of call attention to the British public the fact that wounded veterans were basically being exited from the service and then told to stand in line in the National Health Service, some of them waiting a year to get a prosthetic. It was absurd. And so they had to focus the British public on that issue. And similarly, not because the British people don't care, there's just this expectation, well, the state's going to take care of them. Not necessarily the case, and that's certainly not the case with employment. So there's different set of expectations that we've had to work with over there, and accordingly, there's actually fewer nonprofits, even though we have a huge number in the U.S. But you basically, with most things to compare the UK and the US, you divide by 10, and that gets you right. There's not 6,000 veteran nonprofits in the UK. There's far less than that. So it was, we absolutely did not lower our standards, but we had to look in different places than we had historically. And the two organizations we've worked with, and continue to work with, RFEA, the Forces Employment Charity, and Walking with the Wounded, are both wonderful. They passed all our tests. They're every bit on par with the best US organizations. And we've continued to up their funding each year. So for now, we're continuing to fund there. We're always looking at other places in the world to potentially expand. No news to report right now, though.
Great. Well, I'm sure that you sparked a lot of insight and intrigue amongst those that were tuning in or will be watching. And some may be wondering how they can actually get involved with Call of Duty Endowment and or your partner charities. What are some of the best ways that they can do that?
Yeah, well, I welcome people to explore our site. It's callofdutyendowment.org and not .com. And if you are a veteran who needs help, the veteran support tab, as we talked about earlier, if you missed it, great opportunity to get routed to the best organizations doing this work that can help you both in the US and UK. If you're an employer looking to hire veterans, we also have information there and ways to get involved. Many of our grantees are very good at working with employers and building up really incredible programs that solve business problems by employing veterans in great jobs. So that's there as well. If you want to financially support us, that opportunity, of course, there's a donate button. And there's great, if you're a gamer, I promise very soon you'll be hearing about some more items in game that all the funds raised will go directly to putting vets in jobs. So lots of different ways to help. You can also follow us on Twitter. It's code CODE 4 vets. So code for vets at Twitter. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Dan. It's been incredible connecting with you and having you be able to share with the viewers and providing some insight into the work that the Call of Duty Endowment is doing. It's particularly meaningful to have a conversation like this on Veterans Day. So again, a big thank you. And for those of you that are watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in. I also encourage you to visit Charity Navigator's blog today. Dan actually has a blog that outlines some of the strategic decisions they've made throughout the pandemic to be able to expand and help even more veterans. So a quick plug for that. And be sure to share this with your friends and family. And like Dan said, is that there's a lot of resources for veterans, especially on a day like today. So please make sure that you're sharing that with your networks. We look forward to continuing to host conversations just like these with other nonprofit leaders. But until then, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye.